Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, February 27, 2025. President Donald Trump meets with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer at the White House, talking about the war in Ukraine and trade and tariffs. We'll hear from the leaders and speak with C-SPAN's Westminster correspondent, Peter Knowles. U.S. Senate joins the House in passing a resolution to overturn the EPA's rule imposing a fee on the oil and gas industries for methane leaks. Bill now goes to President Trump to be signed into law. 2 weeks until a federal government funding extension is needed to avoid a shutdown. But the Trump administration's ongoing freezing or canceling some federal spending and firing federal employees are complicating the negotiations between Republicans and Democrats in Congress. Senate today advances the Education Secretary nominee Linda McMahon on a party line vote. And the National Park Service gives a prediction for the date of peak bloom for the Japanese cherry blossom trees around Washington. It's a major tourist draw. Associated Press writes that President Donald Trump said Thursday that talks to end Russia's invasion of Ukraine are very well advanced, and he expressed confidence that Russian leader Vladimir Putin won't press to restart the war if a truce can be reached. Trump made the comments at the start of a White House meeting with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, where Starmer was expected to make his case to the Republican president that American leadership would be critical to maintain the peace in Ukraine should the three-year war end. Trump said of Putin, "I think he'll keep his word. I've spoken to him. I've known him for a long time now. We had to go through the Russian hoax together." That was from Associated Press. Prime Minister Starmer in the White House Oval Office meeting thanked President Trump for his work on a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine.
Our countries have been bound together for a very long time now. The closest alliance, I think, of any two countries when it comes to prosperity and security. And I know that together we will strengthen that even further. And on issues like Ukraine, thank you for changing the conversation to bring about the possibility that now we can have a peace deal. And we want to work with you to make sure that peace deal is enduring, that it lasts, that it's a deal that goes down as a historic deal, that nobody breaches, and we'll work with you to make sure that that absolutely happens.
The British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, part of his opening statement in the White House Oval Office meeting, reporters asked him and President Trump about the details of a possible Ukraine war peace deal.
Mr. President, could you be persuaded as part of a peace settlement in Ukraine to provide air cover, a backstop security position to the contributions that Europe might make as well?
Well, so President Zelensky is coming to see me on Friday morning, and we're going to be signing really a very important agreement for both sides because it's really going to get us into that country. We'll be working there. We'll have a lot of people working there. And so in that sense, it's very good. It's a backstop, you could say. I don't think anybody's going to play around if we're there with a lot of workers and having to do with rare earths and other things, which we need for our country. And we appreciate it very much. And I look forward to seeing him. We'll be talking about it, and we'll also be talking about that today with the Prime Minister.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, we've already indicated that we'll play our full part in making sure that any deal, if there is one, and I hope there is, and I think this is a historic moment to make sure it's a lasting deal, and we're about to have a discussion about how we can make that work.
But I have to say this, as I said yesterday, you know, you're talking about a peacekeeping force. We have to make a deal first. Right now, we don't have a deal. We have Russia, we have Ukraine. I think we're very well advanced. I think Russia has been acting very well. We have Representatives Steve Witkoff and Scott and Marco and JD. We're all involved, every one of us, and a lot more. But I think we're very well advanced on a deal, but we have not made a deal yet. So I don't like to talk about peacekeeping until we have a deal. I like to get things done. I don't want to give it the bad luck sign. We don't want to do that. But we've had very good talks with Russia, and we've had very good talks, as you know, with Ukraine.
President Donald Trump and the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer in the White House Oval Office at another point during their meeting. Reporter asked President Trump about his calling the Ukrainian president a dictator.
Mr. President, do you still think that Mr. Zelensky is a dictator?
Did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Next question.
Associated Press writes, the European Union on Thursday pushed back hard against allegations by U.S. President Donald Trump that the 27-nation bloc was out to get the United States and warned that it would vigorously fight any wholesale tariff of 25% on all EU products. The tit-for-tat dispute following the comments of Trump, which were aimed at an age-old ally and its main post-war economic partner, further deepened the transatlantic rift that was already widening by Trump's warnings that Washington would drop security guarantees for its European allies. That was reporting from Associated Press. Back to the White House Oval Office and a discussion about trade and tariffs and the EU.
You obviously can do business with our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. You said yesterday that the EU was constructed to screw the US when it comes to trade. What can our Prime Minister say to you to persuade you not to impose tariffs on the United Kingdom?
Yeah, did I use the word that you said, that bad word?
I think so. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, I think that the EU, I've had problems with the EU because, and we're not talking about, we happen to have a great relationship with you, but we did have, and we do have problems with the EU because they've tariffed us. They do it in the form of a VAT tax, which is about 20%, and many other taxes. They sue our companies. They sued Apple, got $16 or $17 billion, which was, I think, totally a ridiculous decision. And they're suing Google for a lot of money. They're suing a lot of other companies, and we don't like the way they're treating our people now. We don't like the way they're treating our companies. They sell us cars. We don't sell them cars. They don't take our cars. They don't take much of our agriculture. And we have a deficit with them of about $350 billion. So I wouldn't say it's been such a great relationship personally, but other people did because it's politically correct to say that it's been good, but it hasn't been good. And we're going to change that. And we are going to have reciprocal tariffs. We're not going to have tariffs. We're going to have reciprocal. Whatever they charge us, we're going to charge them, which for many years, foolishly, I would have done that, but then all of a sudden we had COVID and we had other things to think about. So it took me a little while to get that on, but we had, in my first 4 years, we had the greatest economy in the history of, I think, the world, but certainly in the history of our country. I think we're going to have that again, but the EU was very, very tough on us from the standpoint of trade. Then you could take it a step further and go into NATO, and that was a very tough situation for us. I mean, that's been a very tough situation because we were paying a disproportionate share, and it wasn't good. So, as you know, they paid hundreds of billions of dollars after I got involved, and they evened it out a little bit, but not very much. And then if you look at the war, we're in for $300 billion plus, and they're in for $100 billion. They get their money back, and now we'll get our money back also. But under Biden, you wouldn't have done that. Biden did a terrible job, I have to say. I hate to say that about somebody that sat here just before me, but he did a terrible, terrible job. That war should have never happened, the war between Russia and Ukraine. Frankly, October 7th should have never happened. Israel, that should have never happened. What happened there should have never. Inflation should have never happened. Afghanistan should have never happened. The way they got out, not getting out, but the way they got out. So, but I can say that as far as we're here for a different reason, we're talking about a very different place, and this is some place that I have investments there. I own Turnberry, I own Aberdeen, and I own a great place called Doonbeg in Ireland. So, you know, I have a great warm spot for your country.
And our trade, obviously, is fair and balanced, and in fact, you've got a bit of a surplus, so we're in a different position there. And obviously, we contributed hugely in relation to Ukraine, and taken together with Europe, there's about 50%
It'll
of what's
work,
gone
yeah.
in.
It'll work. It's going to work.
Thank you. So does that mean there won't be any sanctions on the UK then?
We'll have to take a look. I mean, we're going to have a good discussion today, and we have some very talented people on the other side, and we have some people that probably aren't as talented as them, but they're pretty good. Marco, what do you think? Our people are pretty good. And no, we're going to have a good discussion, and we'll be talking about that.
President Donald Trump and the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer in the White House Oval Office, the president referring to Marco, that's the Secretary of State Marco Rubio. On tariffs, President Trump posting today that the previously announced tariffs on goods from Mexico and Canada will now go into effect on March 4th because, quote, drugs are still pouring into our country from Mexico and Canada at very high and unacceptable levels. President Trump adds China will likewise be charged an additional 10% tariff on that date because a large percentage of these drugs, much of them in the form of fentanyl, are made in and supplied by China. And the president in that post mentioning April 2nd, reciprocal tariff date will remain in full force and effect. The president and the prime minister spent about a half an hour in the Oval Office and then had a working lunch meeting and then another half an hour joint news conference in the East Room. You can find the video of all this at cspan.org. One more moment from the Oval Office. The prime minister presented an invitation from King Charles III to the president to visit Balmoral, a royal estate and castle in Scotland that was the late Queen Elizabeth's favorite residence, or Dumfries House, which is near one of the golf clubs in Turnberry, Scotland.
That is really nice. I must make sure his signature's on that. Otherwise, it's not quite as meaningful. It is, and that's quite a signature, isn't it? Beautiful. He's a beautiful man, a wonderful man, and we appreciate it. I've known him, gotten to know him very well, actually. First term and now second term. Perhaps you'd like to say what that very important paragraph.
Yes, so this is a letter from His Majesty the King. It's an invitation for a second state visit. This is really special. This has never happened before. This is unprecedented. And I think that just symbolises the strength of the relationship between us. So this is a very special letter. I think the last state visit was a tremendous success.
It was.
His Majesty the King wants to make this even better than that. So this is truly historic, an unprecedented second state visit, and he wants to talk that through with you.
And that says at Windsor. That's
Yes.
really something.
Yes. What I haven't got yet is your answer. I do need to.
The answer is yes. On behalf of our wonderful First Lady, Melania, and myself, the answer is yes, and we look forward to being there and honoring the King and honoring really your country. Your country is a fantastic country, and it'll be our honor to be there. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. I shall happily take that back to His Majesty.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Joining us now on C-SPAN Radio from London to talk about British Prime Minister Keir Starmer's meeting with President Donald Trump at the White House is Peter Knowles, C-SPAN's Westminster correspondent. Thank you for joining us. The Prime Minister spoke today about rebalancing the Transatlantic alliance. What has been the reaction in Great Britain to this first month of the Donald Trump presidency?
A lot of shock. As a number of things, especially comments about Ukraine and Russia, but not limited to that. USAID, Gaza, and there's been a fair amount of interest in the work or some of the internal goings on. The way this has been expressed is actually in very few words. I mean, I've been going to all the lobby briefings with Downing Street, where an anonymous civil servant speaks on behalf of the government. And just as a footnote, I think it's interesting, it's the same person speaking as was doing that job under the previous Conservative government. It doesn't change according to the who's in power. And what they've been saying is they've talked quite a lot about the deep and enduring relationship, but they've been between the two countries. But they've been really reluctant to engage in the substance. Meanwhile, commentators, by and large, have been astonished by the change in style and content of what's been coming out of the White House, but especially about Ukraine and Russia, and that's really alarmed a lot of people. So there'll have been a lot of interest in some of the changes in the language that we've just heard in the news conference given by the president. But yeah, they've in the lobby briefings saying as little as possible, and that's curiously enough been one of the characteristics of Prime Minister's questions. The last week was a change, but the first few weeks, very, very little said about President Trump and what's been going on, because frankly, I think people have not known what to say. So they've largely kept quiet.
Two big issues did dominate the meeting, Ukraine and trade. When it comes to Ukraine, what was the Prime Minister looking to achieve, and did it sound like he got any of it?
What he's been absolutely determined about is that the understanding that in a new order in which there is hopefully a peace deal, where the expectation is that European powers, led by Britain and France, will be helping to keep the peace, that they can be sure that there is American backup for that, and that the Article 5 of NATO mutual defence would apply. Now, I don't think we heard anything explicit to say that that's what has been achieved today, but it sounded much more likely than what we've been hearing before. So I think that was what Keir Starmer was trying to achieve, and the way his negotiating tactic above all was to agree with the American position that Europe needs to do more, that Europe needs to step up. And he said that again and again, and he'd put things in place only a couple of days ago by increasing defence spending abruptly and taking money away from overseas development aid in this country to actually show President Trump that he was being very serious about it, which is a difficult position to take up if you're a centre-left politician, but that's what he did.
And on trade, the Prime Minister today said our trade relationship is fair, balanced, and reciprocal, but President Trump is still threatening tariffs.
He is, but there was some interesting and pretty ambiguous language around that, hinting that why worry about tariffs if a big trade deal might be possible. So that was left hanging as to which way that would go. The implication seemed to be that either things would get much better and there'd be a free trade deal between the UK and the US, or yes, they would, tariffs would be back on the agenda. But some particularly ambiguous language around that in that news conference.
I'd also like to ask you about Canada, because Canada's head of state is the King of Great Britain. And President Trump continually is saying that it should be the 51st state. The Prime Minister got a question about that as well.
Yes, and he simply brushed that one aside. Of course, he has the weekly experience in Prime Minister's questions of working out how to brush questions aside, and he certainly did so. There's an interesting one there in terms of the state visits, which obviously matters a lot to President Trump. He was very delighted with his invitation, but that at some point King Charles will want to visit his realm in North America to visit Canada. That hasn't, I don't think, yet been announced when that would be, but clearly that's going to have an immense symbolic importance when that does happen. But no, it was just avoided as being a kind of nuisance question in the news conference by the Prime Minister. And indeed, it was a nuisance question. It didn't gel well with the feel-good the vibe that was otherwise abounding in that quite long news conference.
Peter Knowles, C-SPAN's Westminster correspondent, joining us from London. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is Washington Today. Start from the Washington Post. The Senate voted Thursday to overturn a Biden-era rule that required oil companies to pay a fine for emitting methane, a powerful greenhouse gas that has significantly contributed to climate change. The vote was 52-47. The House on Wednesday passed a similar resolution scrapping the Environmental Protection Agency rule, and President Donald Trump is expected to sign the measure into law. That was from the Washington Post. The Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican of South Dakota, spoke about it on the Senate floor before the vote.
Later today, the Senate will also vote on a resolution to block the $6 billion natural gas tax that was included in Democrats' so-called Inflation Reduction Act. This tax would increase costs for energy producers and limit energy production, leading to higher utility bills for many Americans. And under the Biden administration's implementation of this tax, it would hit smaller operations the hardest. On top of that, the tax puts tens of thousands of jobs at risk, including in natural gas-rich states like Pennsylvania, New Mexico, Texas, and North Dakota. The Senate will vote later today to stop implementation of this tax on energy producers. And I appreciate Senator Hoeven's leadership on this issue. Thanks in substantial part to his efforts, energy producers will not have to worry about this unnecessary natural gas tax, and the American people won't have to worry about it driving up their utility bills.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican of South Dakota, on the Senate floor. The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, urged a no vote.
In just a few moments, the Senate will vote on a Republican resolution that is straight from the wish list of big oil and big gas. Instead of spending floor time pushing legislation that will lower costs for American families, Republicans are bowing to big oil and gas billionaires by trying to reverse the methane waste emissions charge, which Democrats passed in the Inflation Reduction Act. Donald Trump and DOJ claim to care about efficiency, but Republicans are undoing a measure to reduce oil and gas waste and are making prices for the consumer go up. Prices going up when they're saying they want prices to go down. The rule we passed has been one of our most important tools to lower energy prices, to hold big oil and big gas accountable, to keep excessive and harmful levels of methane out of our atmosphere, which my friend Mr. Whitehouse, who's done such a good job on this issue, tells me is 80 times as poisonous as CO2. Without this safeguard, big oil and gas can waste as much natural gas as they like and then pass the cost on to consumers.
The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, on the Senate floor. The Senate passed this resolution 52-47 along party lines. The House had passed it Wednesday, so it goes to President Trump and is expected to be signed into law. The Senate is also expected to vote soon on another resolution repealing energy efficiency standards for tankless gas water heaters. The House passed that bill today, 221 to 198, with 2 voting present. The 2 present votes were from Republicans, and 11 House Democrats voted yes. Senate today voted to advance the nomination of Linda McMahon for Education Secretary. That vote was 51 to 47, also party line. Senator Mark Wayne Mullen, Republican of Oklahoma, posting on X, President Trump's education pick, Linda McMahon, is tough as nails. Today, Senate Republicans will put her on the procedural clock for confirmation. Senator Mullen included this video.
Linda is as tough as nails, and I didn't know her really until this confirmation process. We have had a good working relationship now. She is very serious and very focused on education. That's what even brought her into politics. People have got to go back and look at her history. She got involved in her local school board in state education because of what's happening in her kids' own school, which you got to respect that. And then when she sees the problems from the local level to the state level with what the Department of Education has done, her focus is to get the education closer to the kids. Get the school boards more involved, make sure the states are more involved, make sure the superintendents has a lot more opportunities and choices on how to make decisions to educate his school, making sure those dollars go to the classroom instead of going through layers of bureaucracy. And so to do that isn't cutting education funding, it's making that dollar go farther. And if you realize, how long that dollar gets cut up, or how long it takes that dollar to get there, and how many times it gets cut up before it actually gets to the school system, how much more we'll have to spend on the pupil themselves and get us from being ranked 40th in the world to put us in the top 10 in the world. And that's where our education should be.
Senator Mark Wayne Mullen, Republican from Oklahoma, posting that video before today's successful Senate cloture vote to advance the Education Secretary Linda McMahon's nomination. Before the vote, Senator Gary Peters, Democrat from Michigan, spoke on the Senate floor.
All across America, from small towns like Grand Marais to cities like Grand Rapids, public schools serve as the bedrock of our communities. As a product of Michigan public schools, the son of a public school teacher, and having watched my own 3 children attend public schools, I know firsthand the importance of public education. Education is the cornerstone of academic achievement, career development, and lifelong learning in our society. A strong public education system is critical to not only our nation's economy, but community safety, social mobility, and the health of our democracy. We need a Secretary of Education who values and respects public education and the millions of teachers and faculty who support the system. We need a Secretary of Education who will support critical funding streams like Head Start for early education, IDEA for students with disabilities, and the school meal program that ensures that no student goes to class hungry. That is why we cannot allow Mrs. McMahon to run our Department of Education. Instead of working to protect funding for the programs that support our students, improve classrooms, and help recruit the hardworking teachers that we so desperately need today, Mrs. McMahon has made it clear that she has, well, other priorities. During her committee hearing, she blatantly supported efforts to dismantle our education system, including taking funding away from our public schools and using it to make investments in private schools. Mrs. McMahon and others have tried to sell this as, quote, school choice, but we know that it is basically a voucher program that will ultimately give private schools the ability to handpick students and close their doors to everyone else.
Senator Gary Peters, Democrat of Michigan, on the Senate floor after today's cloture vote limiting debate, and it was successful, a confirmation vote on the Education Secretary nomination of Linda McMahon scheduled for Monday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. Some news on some other Trump administration nominees. The Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee approved the Labor Secretary nominee, Lori Chavez-DeRemer, by vote of 13-9. 3 Democrats voted yes. Tim Kaine of Virginia, Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire, and John Hickenlooper of Colorado. 1 Republican voted no, Rand Paul of Kentucky. Senate Judiciary Committee advanced Todd Blanche for Deputy Attorney General, 12-10 party line, and Abigail Slater to be Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust. That vote was 20-2. And the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee approved Stephen Bradbury for Transportation Deputy Secretary. That was party line, 15-13. Story from Politico. The Senate's top appropriator said Thursday she had been instructed by the Trump administration and GOP leadership to start prepping a stopgap spending bill to fund the government through the end of the fiscal year. It's the clearest sign yet that bipartisan negotiations around a 12-bill funding deal are in trouble ahead of the March 14th deadline to avoid a shutdown. Senate Appropriations Chair Susan Collins, Republican of Maine, told a small group of reporters Thursday that she was asked to start working on the funding patch, known as a continuing resolution, or CR, and said in a later interview that it was one option being pursued ahead of a looming lapse in funding for federal programs in just over 2 weeks. But Democrats are still demanding that Republicans agree to put guardrails on Trump and Elon Musk's unilateral actions to freeze and claw back funding Congress had already approved in any government funding package, and Republicans say they will not agree to those conditions. That's from Politico. The House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, was interviewed by CNN's Caitlin Collins Wednesday night.
There's a shutdown deadline that is looming on March 14th, which you well know. Do you think Congress is going to end up passing another continuing resolution then?
Well, look, I wish we didn't have to, but it looks like the Democrats are trying to push us into that. They've added these really crazy conditions onto the negotiation over the last week or so. They've added a condition that says we have to tie the hands of President Trump, that the legislative branch they want us to dictate to the executive branch, for example, a base number of employees for each agency in the executive branch. I don't even think it's constitutional what they're requiring, but it's certainly an absurd notion. But
how
they're
long would
standing
that
by that. So
CR go, do you believe?
Well, we haven't negotiated that yet, but if it's a CR, it may be an entire year-long CR with some anomalies on it. You know how all this works. But it's not what we prefer. We would like to do individual appropriations bills, but it takes both parties to negotiate that. And right now, the Democrats are trying to, it looks like, trying to set up a government shutdown. We can't allow that to happen, and we won't.
Well, you just talked about how important the work that Elon Musk is doing is. If you pass a continuing resolution, won't that just refund all the programs that he says he's cutting that are full of waste, fraud, and abuse?
No, look, you can. That's why I say you add anomalies to a CR. You can increase some spending, you can decrease some spending, you can add language that says, for example, the dramatic changes that have been made to USAID, would be reflected in the ongoing spending. It would be a clean CR, mostly, I think, but with some of those changes to adapt to the new realities here. And the new reality is less government, more efficiency, better return for the taxpayers. And I think that's something everybody should welcome.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, interviewed on CNN Wednesday night. The House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat of New York, was asked about government funding at his news conference today.
Speaker Jeffries, Speaker Johnson has made it clear that a CR is necessary to avoid a government shutdown on March 14th. How has conversations been like between the two offices? He previously said that you guys have added or introduced things that would be pretty much a non-starter, like limiting the powers of the executive branch. What are those conversations like? Are you at the table?
Speaker Johnson and myself had not had a conversation about the appropriations bills because those conversations at the moment are being led by Rosa DeLauro on the Democratic side and Tom Cole on the Republican side. We have great confidence in the leadership of Rosa DeLauro to negotiate in a way that is consistent with the values of the American people and the things that matter, which is how do we lower costs for everyday Americans? And how do we protect things like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid? How do we make sure that people can pay their bills? And how do we keep the American people safe? Those are the core issues that Democrats are working on behalf of the American people. Republicans have the House, the Senate, and the presidency. And as we just saw 2 days ago, Donald Trump managed to be able to convince reluctant Republicans to vote for the largest potential cut to Medicaid in American history. We're going to stand on the side of the American people. It appears that Republicans in the House are going to stand on the side of their super rich donors and wealthy corporations.
House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat of New York, at a news conference today on Capitol Hill. He put out a written statement today that says, quote, regarding reports that the Social Security Administration is shutting down offices and firing critical staff, President Trump, Elon Musk, and House Republicans must keep their hands off Social Security, and a bipartisan spending agreement has to protect the administration of those earned benefits. And from CBS News, government funding expires on March 14th, and keeping the government open past the deadline will likely require bipartisan support in both the House and Senate. Republicans control 53 seats in the Senate, but a funding measure requires 60 votes for passage. In the House, Republicans are operating with a razor-thin majority and a divided conference, in which conservatives regularly vote against government spending bills. That was from CBS News. Washington Today continues in a moment.
On Tuesday, March 4th, watch C-SPAN's live coverage of President Trump's address to Congress, the first address of his second term, and less than 2 months since taking office. C-SPAN's live coverage begins at 8 p.m. Eastern with a preview of the evening from Capitol Hill, followed by the President's speech, which begins at 9 p.m. Eastern, and then watch the Democratic response after the President's speech. We'll also take your calls and get your reaction on social media. Over on C-SPAN 2, you can also watch a simulcast of the evening's coverage, followed by reaction from lawmakers, live from Capitol Hill. Watch President Trump's address to Congress, live Tuesday, March 4th, beginning at 8 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN, our simulcast live on C-SPAN 2, or on C-SPAN Now, our free mobile video app. Also online at cspan.org. C-SPAN, bringing you your democracy unfiltered.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you listen to podcasts. President Donald Trump's pick to oversee a consumer watchdog, begins a Reuters article, faced a grilling from Democrats in the U.S. Senate on Thursday as the White House presses ahead with aggressive efforts to dismantle the agency. Jonathan McKiernan, nominated to lead the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, vowed before the Senate Banking Committee he would fully and faithfully enforce consumer financial protection laws. But he maintained the agency had previously operated beyond those responsibilities and needs to be streamlined and made more accountable. That was from Reuters. Jonathan McKernan testified before the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. That's the full name. Questions from Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, the committee's ranking Democrat and a former special advisor in the Obama administration that helped get the CFPB up and running after it was created in 2010.
We have the statutory obligations. We've got, like I said, we don't have time to go through all 88 of them. But let me ask you, Mr. McKernan, how do you plan to run the CFPB legally when Elon Musk has told every one of its 1,700 employees to do nothing?
Ranking member, I'm not sure if I agree with the premise that all employees are told to do nothing. I think, I don't know the nuances.
Well, I'm not asking nuance here. All 1,700 employees have been locked out of the building and told to do nothing, and if they hear that another employee is doing something, to report them to DOJ.
Ranking member, I don't know the specifics of the mandate, but I'm fairly certain there were exceptions there. Indeed, to get my application processed so I could get here today, my application had to go through the CFPB's.
So you say somebody's doing something. Okay, let me ask it the other way then. You say you want to follow the law. In order to fulfill the legal obligations of the CFPB, do you commit, if confirmed, as soon as you are sworn in, to immediately lift the stop work order?
If confirmed, I'm going to follow the law. The specifics of that, I'm going to have to get advised on the specifics of the situation there. But again, the North Star here is you got to follow the law, fully and faithfully execute the statute. I take that very seriously as a former congressional staffer. I'm an Article 1 guy. I'm going to make sure the CFPB performs each of its statutorily performed functions.
You follow the law, then we'll all be good.
Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts, ranking member on the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee, questioning Jonathan McKernan, nominated as director of CFPB, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. He's a former FDIC board member. NBC News writes that the CFPB is moving to drop a suit against Capital One brought during the Biden administration just last month that accused the bank of cheating customers out of a collective $2 billion. A one-line court filing Thursday said the agency was seeking to voluntarily dismiss its suit with prejudice, meaning it would not be revived. An agency spokesperson did not immediately respond to a request for comment. That was from NBC News. And from the Hill, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy said Thursday he would implement plans to create a supercharge in air traffic control staffing amid shortages. He said in a statement, the staffing shortage has been a known challenge for over a decade, and this administration is committed to solving it. He noted the position requires skill and rigor. He said the Federal Aviation Administration would increase starting salaries by 30% for candidates who go to the FAA Academy for Air Traffic Control positions and reduce the current 8-step hiring process to a 5-step process to accelerate the hiring speed. That was from The Hill. Another Trump administration nominee who testified today before the Senate Banking Committee was Stephen Myron for chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. That's an office within the Executive Office of the President. Senator Tim Scott, Republican of South Carolina, the committee chair, asked him about the economic advice he'd be giving to President Trump.
Dr. Myron, obviously, your predecessor, Dr. Bernstein, advocated for extreme policies like the Green New Deal and, frankly, the spending bills, the American Rescue Plan. First bill out of the chute, $1.9 trillion, I believe led to the 9% inflation that we experienced in the summer of 21. How will your recommendations differ from your predecessor?
Thank you, Senator. One of the core principles of economic management of the economy is that economic policy should, as economists say, lean against the wind. That means that when the economy is in a rut, policy should support it with some stimulus to get it out of the rut, to boost employment and stabilize, and stabilize the economy. And when the economy is soaring, well above potential where it could be, that policy should hold back a bit, right? Now, if you look at what happened, the story of stimulus and throughout the COVID experience, when Congress passed the CARES Act, the output gap, the size of the hole in the economy, was about 10% of the economy, right? The size of the CARES Act was roughly similarly sized, so that was appropriate. By the time we get to the American Rescue Plan, the output gap is just about narrowed. It's only about a percentage point of the economy. So following it up with another stimulus package of roughly similar size was a an economics 101 style error, and of course the inflation that we experienced was problematic. My advice, if confirmed, will be to follow the traditional wisdom of leaning against the wind.
Stephen Myron, nominated for chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, questioned by Senator Tim Scott, Banking Committee Chair, Republican of South Carolina. There were two other nominees before the committee today, for Commerce Undersecretary for Industry and Security and for the Director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency. You can find the video of this entire hearing at our website, cspan.org. Wall Street today, the Dow down 193, NASDAQ down 530, S&P down 94. Story from Newsmax. Federal Communications Commission Chair Brendan Carr is preparing to weaken the legal protection known as Section 230 that shields big tech companies from liability, according to a report from the New York Post. Post columnist Charles Gasparino reported that Carr's plan to erode Section 230 could potentially cost some of the world's most profitable companies billions in market value. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996 was written to protect tech companies from being held legally responsible for third-party postings on their platforms, as it was thought that defamation lawsuits over content posted by third parties could crush the fledgling industry. That was from Newsmax. The FCC chair, Brendan Carr, took part in a program today hosted by Semaphore News titled Innovating to Restore Trust in News, a National Summit, and Section 230 came up.
For people who care about free expression, which I think both of us, the framers of the Constitution, just the typical long-standing American view is that vastly the biggest threat to free expression in the United States is the government, is you. And you wrote in 2021 a newsroom's decision about what stories to cover, how to frame them should be beyond the reach of any government official. And I wonder, has your view on that changed now that you're in power?
Look, what I've said is that the greatest threat that we have seen over the last several years really has come from large social media companies that have amassed incredible amounts of power. The social media companies got more power over more speech than any institution in history. And what we saw them doing with that power was discriminating against viewpoints, and the government was involved. The government, particularly the Biden administration, was pressuring social media companies to shut down core political speech. You had Mark Zuckerberg last summer put out a letter sort of saying we felt pressured to do that. My position is we want more speech, not less. That's my approach on...
But you're not a cable news commentator. You are a government official who can threaten companies, can impact their businesses. Don't you, I mean, do you, it seems like you no longer think the government is the main threat to speech now that you're the government.
I think the government should follow the law. I mean, President Trump issued an executive order to stop government officials from calling into social media companies and asking them to take down posts. I think that's a good thing. But look,
because now you do it on Twitter.
Well, look, you've got social media companies on the one hand, and you've got, again, licensed broadcasters on the other. If people don't want to have the public interest obligations, it's my job to enforce it.
Yeah.
If people want to change that, they can go to Congress. But if you're going to have a license to be a broadcaster, it comes with something called you have to serve the public interest. And if you don't want to do that, that's okay. And I will give you the address of the FCC. And if you're a broadcaster, you don't want to serve the public interest, you are free to turn your license in, and you can go podcasting, you can go over the top. But as long as Congress says that you have unique access to spectrum, valuable spectrum, we can find something to do with that spectrum.
I know, it's terrifying. For those of, thank God I'm not, I live on the internet.
That was Ben Smith, Semaphore News editor-in-chief, interviewing the Federal Communications Commission Chair Brendan Carr, a Republican appointee, at today's Semaphore program on Trust in News. FCC Commissioner Ana Gomez, a Democratic appointee, posted on X this week, increasingly the biggest threats to free speech are not coming from big tech or from the media, they're coming from our own government. An advisory opinion on Section 230 is an attempt to increase government control of online speech. It is meant to bully private social media companies to comply with direct demands from the administration. An advisory opinion like this signals what the FCC already knows. It has little to no authority to weigh in on this complex issue. That's why this is a vague and weak effort. Only Congress can change and amend the law that gave us the internet as we know it today. Part of the post from FCC Commissioner Ana Gomez. Detroit Free Press reporting on Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer's State of the State address Wednesday night in Lansing. After campaigning against President Donald Trump last year, Whitmer has promised to collaborate with his administration on shared goals. While some Democratic governors have positioned themselves as leaders of the resistance in Trump's second term, Whitmer has struck a more conciliatory tone in a state she and Trump have each won twice. She reiterated her pledge Wednesday to seek common ground with Trump. At the same time, Whitmer repeatedly called on lawmakers from both political parties to work together, too. That was from the Detroit Free Press. Here's part of Governor Whitmer's speech.
I took an oath of office to serve the people of Michigan, and that means all the people of Michigan. That's my commitment to you, no matter who is in the White House or who is on the other side of the aisle in Lansing. Yes, I do hope to find common ground with President Trump and work with the Democratic-led Senate and Republican-led House on our shared priorities. Now, I'm not looking for fights, but I won't back down from them either. In Michigan, we have an opportunity and an obligation to lead by example. Our state represents America in every way, economically, geographically, politically, and socially. People from every walk of life call Michigan home. We don't always agree, but we move forward together. That is the source of our strength. Let's show the rest of the country how to get things done. Right now, I know that politics, especially national politics, can be exhausting. I feel it too. At a high level, we're facing two big challenges: economic uncertainty and political division. First, economics. It's hard to buy a house or car because of high interest rates. It's still hard to pay the bills. Just this month, inflation jumped back up to 3%. Businesses are facing uncertainty too. Industry leaders and top economic minds on both sides of the aisle are warning us about the havoc that 25% tariffs would wreak on Michigan's auto industry, while also raising expenses, everyday expenses for our families. And as for politics, there's no sugarcoating it. We seem very divided today. Partisanship has infected every aspect of our lives, driven by opportunistic politicians and media figures who live by a philosophy, I win if you lose. Their divisive rhetoric is amplified by algorithms designed to make us angry and keep us scrolling. We're all being manipulated by the largest and most powerful companies in the world, who profit more when we start to believe that we have nothing in common. But that's just not true.
Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, a Democrat, giving her State of the State address Wednesday night in Lansing. She also said at one point that her message was directed to all young people, but especially to our young men. She said the last thing any of us wants is a generation of young men falling behind their fathers and grandfathers. An AP article notes that young men swung sharply for Donald Trump in the November election. Governor Whitmer's term runs through 2026. She is term limited, cannot run again for governor. Last month on the TV show The View, she was asked about running for either U.S. Senate in 2026 or president in 2028. For the first, she said no way, or more specifically, NFW. And to the second, she said, what comes after that, I don't know yet. I really don't. I will never totally check out, but I might want to walk the earth for a little while again, get reacquainted with my family. Also announced today that the freshman U.S. Senator from Michigan, Democrat Alyssa Slotkin, will be giving the Democratic response to President Donald Trump's joint address to Congress next week. Senator Chuck Schumer, the minority leader, calling Slotkin nothing short of a rising star in our party. Also, they announced that Congressman Adriano Espaillat, Democrat of New York, will deliver the Spanish language response to the president's speech. And finally, on C-SPAN Radio's Washington Today, National Park Service Superintendent Kevin Grice announced today the peak bloom prediction dates for the thousands of Japanese cherry blossom trees around Washington, D.C.'s Tidal Basin and National Mall. And he got a little help from a well-known TV game show host.
So now we're ready to announce the predicted bloom dates. But first, let's hear from a very special guest.
Hi, I'm Ken Jennings, host of Jeopardy! I'm excited to announce that I will be a Grand Marshal at this year's National Cherry Blossom Festival Parade. I hope to see you on Constitution Avenue in Washington, D.C. on Saturday, April 12th. But first, my job today is to help the National Park Service make an important announcement. Let's take a look at a special Final Jeopardy category. Peak bloom. And here's the clue. The iconic cherry trees around the tidal basin in Washington, D.C. will display a spectacular canopy of white blossoms when they reach peak bloom on these predicted dates in 2025.
All right, so now let's reveal the predicted peak bloom dates in the form of a question, of course, per Jeopardy rules. What is March 28th to the 31st, 2025?
National Park Service Superintendent Kevin Grice at a news conference at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in Washington. Story from the Washington Post. Peak bloom is declared by the agency when 70% of the blossoms around the tidal basin, the reservoir on the National Mall, have opened. Organizers expect 1.5 million people to visit the flowering trees during this year's National Cherry Blossom Festival. The festival, which commemorates the 3,000 cherry trees Japan gifted to the United States as a symbol of friendship in 1912, will run from March 20th through April 13th. That from the Washington Post. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.